Before you post, let's talk about social media today. According to statistics, Google, 5.3 billion people are on some form of social media every single day. And according to the same statistics, those 5.3 billion people spend an average of 3 hours a day. Actually, 3 hours sounds a little bit low to me. I think it's more like 4 or 5 or 6 hours, especially for some people. Now, as we think about social media from a Christian perspective, we have to remember that we are supposed to be light in a dark world. Matthew 5:13-16 tells us that you're the light of the world. The city is set upon a hill, should not be hidden. And it talks about how we are to show our light so that people can see God through us. So let's talk about some principles about how to use social media well as a Christian. We're going to use the acronym POST, P-O-S-T. So as we talk about using social media well, the first letter as we look at, the letter P, is going to be the question, is it pure? Before you post something, make sure it's pure and it's befitting for what a Christian should say or do or look like. Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8 says, "Finally, my brethren, whatever so things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there's any virtue or anything praiseworthy, focus and look toward those things." 1 Timothy 5:22 tells us, "Do not lay hands on anyone hastily, nor share in anyone else's sins. Keep yourself pure." Be careful before you forward somebody's post or before you join a certain group, and make sure it's something that Christians should be a part of. Well, that purity there is important because it shows exactly who we are. 2 Corinthians chapter 8, looking there in verse 6, says, "By purity and by knowledge, by long-suffering, by kindness, and by the Holy Spirit, and by sincere love, we show one another our relationship with God." The often quoted verse, 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 12. "Timothy, let no one despise your youth, but be an example. Be an example in the things which you do, in word, in conduct, in spirit, in faith, and in purity." When you're thinking about purity, consider your motive. Why is it that you want to post what you're posting? Consider the words you're using, whether those words are the right words or good words. Consider what you're wearing. Oh boy, sometimes that's a big deal with the ways things people will post. Is what you're wearing something which shows that you're a Christian, which shows that you have a value system and a belief system? Ephesians 4:29, "Let no corrupt word come out of your mouth, but only that which is good to edify other people, that it may impart grace to the hearers." Proverbs chapter 7, looking there in verse 10, when the father is telling his son, be careful who it is that you marry and who you want to be with. He says, be careful, because this man who he's talking about had someone who met with him who wore the attire of a harlot and had a very crafty heart. In many ways, the clothes that we wear show something about our personality, show something about our value system. And so be careful about what you wear. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 8, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." So the letter P stands for being pure. And then as we look at the letter O stands for being other-oriented. And what I mean by that is, do we care about other people in the things that we say? Philippians chapter 2, perfect passage about service, right? Philippians chapter 2, beginning of verse 1, "Therefore, if there's any consolation in Christ, if there's any comfort of love, if there's any fellowship in the Spirit, if any affection and mercy," Paul says, "fulfill my joy by being like-minded, having the same love, being of one accord, of one mind. Let nothing be done out of selfish conceit, but in lowliness of heart, let each one of you esteem others better than himself. Let each one of you look out not only to his own interest, but also to the interest of others." What you post is a reflection of who you are in the heart. It's an indicator of how you feel about other people. And so John 13, beginning there in verse 34, John says, "A new commandment I give you, that you love one another as I have loved you. You need to love one another. By this all men will know that you're my disciples, that you have love for each other." You see, the things we post, we have to be careful about because they could make another person stumble. And we don't want that to happen. I don't want what I put online, even if I think it's funny or even if I think it's powerful and true and it's actually going to convince somebody, which we never convince people on social media, even though we try. We need to make sure we don't make anyone else stumble. Let's look at some passages. Romans 14:13. Don't judge anymore one another, but instead resolve this. Do not put a stumbling block or a cause to stumble in your brother's way. In other words, don't be the person who makes that person leave Jesus. Don't be that person who makes it harder for someone else to be a Christian. Matthew 18, looking at verses 18 through 20, talks about how to resolve conflict. When you're angry at a brother, don't put it on Facebook and say, hey, has everybody heard what he did? Don't go to Snapchat and don't go to some of these other things and say, hey, well, at least I'm better than that or whatever. Matthew 18 says if you have a problem with somebody, you need to go and talk to them individually. And if that doesn't fix it, you need to find somebody that both of you respect and bring that person along. But do what you can to encourage and to help people be other people oriented in everything that you do. So the first letter, P, talks about purity. The letter O talks about being other people oriented. The letter S, oh, this is a hard one, talks about being self-controlled. Self-control is one of the fruit of the Spirit. Galatians 5:22 through 23. But the fruit of the Spirit is love and joy and peace and patience and kindness, long-suffering, goodness and faithfulness, gentleness and self-control. And against such things there is no law. Paul talks about self-control over in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, 24 through 27. He's talking about athletes and how athletes have to control what they eat. They have to control their exercise. They have to control their daily living so that they can perform as well as they can. And so an athlete is always looking at everything he does and controlling it as closely as he can to be sure that he's living the way he should. That's the way we should be. As Christians, we're running that heavenly race, and we need to be sure that we're controlled. We don't let our anger take over, and we don't let our humor take over, and we don't let our wrath take over. But instead, we need to be sure that Jesus has taken over and treat one another with kindness. Self-control is a mark of maturity and a mark of transformation. 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 7, for God has not given us a spirit of timidity. He's not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of sound judgment. You see, when a person is able to control himself, when a person has self-control, that shows that he is mature, especially as a Christian, that he is matured. Titus chapter 2 and verse 11 reminds us that the grace of God has appeared to all people, teaching us that denying ungodliness and worldly lust, we can live soberly, righteously, and godly for Him. And so that's an important thing. And so before you post and being self-controlled, weigh the words that you're about to say. Look at how heavy those words are and make sure there's something that you would rather be carrying along for something that would remember. So many people, politicians and movie stars and all of us, I guess, you can go back maybe 5 years or 10 years when we just put something silly online or maybe we were angry. And the weight of those words follow us even to today. Matthew 12, 33 through 37 talks about a good tree and a bad tree. They're known by their fruit. And so we have to be careful because the fruit of our lips reveals what's within our heart. And so Matthew, let me see where I'm looking. Matthew 12, looking there in verse 36, this is every idle word which I speak, I'll be judged for. I'll give an account for in the day of judgment. For my words is what I'm justified by, and by my words is what I may be condemned by. Weigh the words that you say. Weigh the things you do. Secondly, just because something is true and just because something is right, I need to weigh the approach. How is it that I'm approaching this subject? How is it that I'm approaching? Am I just having a war going back and forth? Or am I working in a way which brings other people closer to Jesus? Proverbs 26, beginning of verse 4, don't answer a fool according to his folly, otherwise you'll become just like him. Now, the very next verse is funny because it says, answer a fool according to his folly, otherwise he'll be wise in his own eyes. Well, on the surface, those look like they contradict one another. One says, don't talk to a fool. And the other one says, you better talk to that fool. What's it talking about? Know the approach that's wise. Whatever the system is, whatever the situation is, be aware of what that system may be. Evaluate your argument. In John 17, looking there in verse 10 and 11, we see the Bereans, and they heard Paul come in and preach, and so they went home that night and they studied the scriptures to see if those things which he was written were true. Just because it's something you think does not mean it's right. Evaluate the argument. Be that mature person who can grow. Be that mature person who has empathy and who can see the other side and the other perspective which is there. Also, talking about self-control, realize there's sometimes you don't have to attend the argument. There's sometimes people want to fight. You don't have to fight. You don't have to enter into the ring. You don't have to defend whatever it is you believe in, not in that situation. And so sometimes you need to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, and know when to run. Proverbs chapter 19 and verse 11, the discretion of a man makes him very slow to anger, and his glory is to overlook a transgression. It's a glory to a person to be able to endure what someone else does and not have that person change who you are. Not have that person who controls who you are and makes you enter into a situation that might be dangerous. All right, so P stands for purity. O stands for other-oriented. S stands for self-controlled. And T stands for truth. Is what you're saying true? Is what you're saying right? Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, you dwell on theirs. Dwell on the truth. Ephesians 4 and verse 25, put away all that lying. Let each one of you speak truth with his neighbor, for we are members of one another. Truth is vital. Truth is knowable. John chapter 8 verse 32, Jesus speaking of himself said, you shall know the truth, and that truth sets you free. John 17:17 tells us the word is the source of truth. And so as you and I go to Jesus, as you and I go to our Bible, we see truth. Now, as you think about truth, be careful where your source of truth may be. You see, over and over, I see people who will post, I guess usually it's on Facebook, and they'll say, starting with this post, I now own all my pictures, and I now own all my statements, and I can't be used by Mark Zuckerberg for this or that or whatever else. And usually it's what's happened is a person has posted or repeated what another person has posted, and they think that gives them some sort of control over whatever else, and actually it doesn't do very much. Other times people will say, well, you know, the president has decided to take everybody with blonde hair, and they're going to make them all move to Arizona. And I just made that up. Hopefully you understand that because it wasn't true. Other people would say, well, you know, this is happening and that's happening. And you know it's not true. Be careful before you post something and make sure that what you're posting still gives you some credibility, that it's true. Also, with talking about truth, consider your safety. TMI, too much information. When you tell somebody you're going to be gone for 2 weeks and that the key is under the doormat, it gets you in trouble, doesn't it? When you go around and you tell people how much something costs, or you tell somebody your salary, or we put so much stuff online that can get us in so much trouble and cause us to be scammed. Stay true to yourself. Don't put too much information. Consider your safety, and consider the safety especially of your children. Thirdly, consider your credibility. Are you spreading lies? Are you actually working for propaganda for a politician or a country or whatever else it may be as you're entering into these arguments? Are you in an echo chamber where everybody you follow on Twitter believes the same thing, so you think everybody else does as well? Or everybody on Snapchat is pushing this, and so of course everybody must be that way as well. Be careful about your credibility. Be sure that you're not spreading lies. Be sure that Jesus shows through your heart. Be sure that people can see that you have a relationship with the Lord and that you love Him and you love other people as well. Social media is such a blessing. It allows us to rekindle friendships we had long ago with people who don't live near us. It allows us to know people even from other countries and be able to discuss the gospel and other great things with them. It allows us to see what's happening in our world and see the opinion that many people have of what's going on. It allows us to have great information. But be careful. Be careful, because any good thing Satan can use. And so be careful what you post on social media.